Good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to be here. This is such a wonderful center, but more than a center, more than the property and the room and all of that, it's so beautiful to see so many shining faces and especially shining eyes. You know, as people meditate and as they love God, their eyes get brighter and brighter and more clear and calm. And it's very beautiful. One of the nice things about the job Devi and I have, which is in part traveling all over the world to Ananda centers, is that we get to see that meditation and being a devotee and disciple of Master unifies people all over. Here we came and we chanted, and was that Marathi or Hindi that we were? Hindi. So we were singing in Hindi, but we have sung this same chant in Croatian, in Russian, in Spanish in Mexico. In all places, people love to sing to God. Daviji and I want to speak a little bit about experiences with Swamiji, because we've had a long and very filled life of experiences with him. But this chant reminds me of one story. I first came to India with Swamiji in 1974. And at that time we landed first in Kolkata, because that was, of course, where Swamiji started in India in 1958. And there we met Master's brother, Sananda Lal Ghosh, and spent some time with him. And it was very beautiful. But the story that this reminds me is that we were in a taxi cab taking a ride from one location to another location. And the driver was a Sikh, and he had a little picture of Guru Nanak hanging from the rearview mirror. And Swamiji, who spoke a little Bengali, said to this man, "Oh, Guru Nanak, we have a chant that we love to sing," that was his, Hey Hari Sundara. And the cab driver said very simply back, he said, "Of course, sir. What would life be without singing to God?" And Swami would often tell that story in America, because, keep this a secret, but most cab drivers in America don't sing to God all the time. And so Swamiji would tell that story to remind us that our minds and our hearts and our voices should keep turning toward God all the time when we can. It's actually rather poignant being here in this sense, that when I first was with Swamiji, I started taking his classes in 1967. And we were just talking earlier with a group of the Ananda teachers who teach various courses. And they were talking about which courses they teach, level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4. Well, the first course that I took from Swamiji was level 1, probably level 1, some mixture of level 2 in there, but not the whole course, but definitely level 1. He called it Raja Yoga course at that time. And preceding that was, he taught Hatha Yoga. And so we would have an hour of Hatha Yoga, followed by a little break for people to take some food, and then an hour or a little more of what he called Raja Yoga, but was basically how to meditate, or level 1 as we now have called it. And so that was what Swamiji, that was the way that he started out, was teaching those courses. And this was in the San Francisco Bay Area, so he taught in San Francisco, but then he also taught in other locations within driving distance. So every night of the week he would teach in a different location. And only occasionally, maybe once every 3 months or 4 months, would he come back and teach another series in San Francisco. And so that being pretty much the only way that I could connect with Swamiji on a regular basis, I took that How to Meditate or Raja Yoga course and the Hatha Yoga course. I took it once, and then when he taught it the next time, I took the same course again. When he taught it the next time, I took the same course again. And so he saw that I was more than casually interested, and then he had me helping after that. But what I was going to say is it's actually quite poignant tonight, because the other way that I could connect on a regular basis with Swamiji is that here we are Thursday night. Every Thursday night in his little apartment, he had a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco. And every Thursday night he had an informal satsang, just like this. So imagine a room not as big as this, half as big as this. And there would be 15 or 20 people. And before we came down, we didn't know exactly the format, so we asked the teachers, and Tushti and Surendra especially, what should we do tonight? And they said, well, why don't you chant, or, start with a prayer, chant a little, do some meditation, then give a discourse, and then questions and answers. So that's what we'll do tonight. But it was as if they were coming up with that format afresh for the first time. That was exactly the format that Swamiji did in 1967. And Thursday nights, we would gather together like this, but a smaller group, a third this number of people, and we would chant. But because none of us knew the chants as well as all of you do, then Swamiji would have to teach us chants. None of us knew rhythm very well, so he had all these various kinds of cymbals and little shakers, and he taught me a simple rhythm on a mridanga, and so I was the official drummer. I was quite proud of my position as the drummer, It's just one simple little rhythm. And so most people had some way of accompanying the chants. He was only trying to get us involved, only trying to get us active. And he would occasionally stop and he'd say, no, you've got the rhythm wrong. Follow me. And we'd all follow him, and then he'd chant to that. And so anyway, it was very sweet. But what Swamiji did, and I'm sure that Master did it before for him, was use basically an occasion just to share together. Swamiji said he never liked to think of himself as a teacher, that he didn't teach people. All he did was share what had been given to him. And so gathering together in a group like this, a satsang group, and just sharing. But Swamiji also told us that what we say, the content, is less important, that the content is really a carrier wave, a vibration for sharing friendship and love. When we had a couple who are just going to arrive here in Pune tomorrow, they're leading a pilgrimage, Krishna Das and Mantra Devi, and they helped lead a center in Los Angeles. And when they went there, they didn't quite know how they should approach it. And so they went to Swamiji and asked, what would you like us to do in starting this center in Los Angeles? And there are so many possible answers to that. Well, I want you to give these courses and these kinds of courses and this schedule, and establish these meditation groups, and it could have been that kind of thing. Swamiji didn't answer that way at all. He said, your only job is to share Master's love. And that so relaxed this couple, because that's really all that we really can do, is share the love of God or the love of Guru with each other. Even the techniques that we get, and that if we're having an active sadhana that we practice, the meditations that we practice, the kriyas that we practice, they seem to be techniques. They seem to be something that we do. But really, all they really are at their essence is an expression of God's love for us. As Swamiji put it in the Festival of Light, not quite this way, but think of it this way. The masters don't have to come here. They have no compulsion to incarnate, no reason to incarnate. So they're at a plane that is completely blissful, completely expansive, that vibrationally there's no difficulty, no problem at all. And yet, out of love for us, they take on an incarnation, they take on a body. And it's not as if when a master takes on a body, they are not subject to the laws of the physical plane. I mean, they can transcend them, but they don't do that, because what kind of an example would it be for us? They come here to take on the appearance of a physical body, of a personality, of a certain kind of a life, so that we can relate to them the way we would relate to other people, perhaps slightly wiser than we are. But imagine, how would we relate? Because their job is not to say how different I am from all of you. They come out of love for us, as Master said in his beautiful poem, God's Boatman. I will come again and again, 1,000,000,000,000 times, if need be, as long as there is one stray brother crying by the wayside. Now that's the most pure expression of God's love for us that it's possible to have. So when they come, they don't come to show how different they are from us. They come in the guise of a human being, basically saying, you can do what I did. You too can become self-realized. If they came as a big ball of light, how would we relate to that? We would say, well, you're so different, I can't do that. If they came floating 3 feet above the ground in their physical body, we would say, well, I can't float above the ground. I might as well quit. But they don't. They come disguised, really. And so Swamiji, too, came kind of disguised as a normal human being. Now, these great ones can't put too many veils over the light that shines within. So none of us ever thought of Swami as just a normal human being. I mean, he spoke 7 languages, and he wrote books in a week, that were profound books, and composed songs, and was a wonderful leader. And so none of us related to him as, just one of the guys. But nonetheless, he didn't differentiate himself so much that there wasn't the thought in us, well, I can do that too, or at least I can aspire to do that. One of the things that I loved about Swamiji is that, and he often said this, and then over the years, we saw how hard he worked at taking profound truths and making them very simple so that everyone could understand them. And so when we read his books or hear his lectures, and those of us who did hear him live, the thought wouldn't be in our mind of, how obtuse that is, how difficult that is to understand. He understands it, but I'm never going to understand it. Isn't he wonderful? And aren't I just a little kind of a clam sitting here not understanding very much. He always translated, but never diminished the truths. So he put them in such a way, still keeping their purity, but in such a way that we could understand them. And more than understand them, we had the reaction of, well, of course, I knew that. Of course, we didn't know it before he said it, but when he said it, we had the reaction, oh, of course, that's so familiar that I knew that already. So not only did he take wonderful high philosophy and put it in such a way that we could understand it and recognize it, but more important than that, he individually cared about every one of his students. And he demonstrated that over and over again. So it wasn't just an impersonal love, wasn't just an impersonal friendship. It was very personal. That's why when he said, your job to this couple, your job is to give people's masters love. He had demonstrated that to us over and over again. So it wasn't as if he was available so everyone could go and have long counseling sessions with him. Generally, his teaching, his counseling even, was done in groups because he had a world mission to do, and he didn't have lots and lots of time. Nonetheless, he gave many, many, many hundreds of people. He would give them time to come and talk with him, ask him questions. But it was a common experience for people. They would have all of these questions, and sometimes they would even write their questions down. And then they would go, fully intending to go through their list of the 12 most important questions in my life right now, go through that list with Swamiji, and then he would say, oh, let's have some tea. And he would maybe tell a story or two about Master. And person after person would come out. And then after, I don't know, a half hour or so, he would say, did you have any questions you wanted to ask me? No, sir. No, sir, they're all answered. And then sometimes they would leave, and about half hour later, when their consciousness began to descend again, they would come to somebody and they would say, I had this whole list of questions and I didn't get a chance to ask a single one of them. But you see, the real answer to questions is not to answer the question. Because the real answers to questions do not arise on the level of consciousness at which those questions are asked. The real answer comes by raising the level of consciousness. And when we raise the level of consciousness, the best answer to a question is not an answer to a question. It is that the question itself dissolves into meaninglessness. And so we go in all worried about this or that. You know, what is exactly the right way that I should hold my fingers in meditation? It's so important to me. And raise the level of consciousness. And what does it matter exactly how you hold your fingers? Love of God is so much more important than the position of your fingers that it just doesn't matter. And then when the consciousness descends again, oh, I forgot to ask him about my fingers. There was a lovely story about this happened with Vivekananda and Ramakrishna. And Vivekananda, when he was young, of course, was a disciple of Ramakrishna's. But his father died when Vivekananda was still very young. And even though the family was well off, when his father died, he had loaned many people money and they refused to return it. And so Vivekananda felt that he needed to support the family. And so he began looking for a job. He said he walked looking for a job. He walked so far that he wore holes in his shoes. And he couldn't find it. He would go to people who his father had done favors for, and they wouldn't help him. It was a difficult time, but of course God does this as a play. So at any rate, he knew that Ramakrishna spoke to Divine Mother every night. And so he came to his guru and he said, Guruji, I know that you speak to Divine Mother. When you see her tonight, can you please ask her to help me and my family in this terrible situation? And then he would come, Vivekananda would come the next morning and say, did you ask her? Did you ask her? And Ramakrishna would say, oh, I forgot. And this happened several days in a row. And so finally Vivekananda was a little bit frustrated by this. And so Ramakrishna said, well, I'll tell you what. Tonight, Divine Mother will appear to you, and you ask her your question. And sure enough, that night, Divine Mother, Kali, appeared to Vivekananda, and in the morning, Ramakrishna went to him, just as he had come to Ramakrishna, and said, so, she came to you last night. Did you ask her your question? I forgot. See, when the mind is uplifted like that, these little difficulties that are very serious difficulties in our life, but they don't seem quite to relate to cosmic consciousness. But does that mean that Divine Mother didn't hear the question simply because they didn't ask it out loud? Of course not. Divine Mother is in our own hearts, in our own minds, much more deeply than we can ever think or say. And so Divine Mother heard the question, heard it from Ramakrishna, heard it from Vivekananda. And she sent a devotee of Ramakrishna's who understood the dilemma. He had wealth, and he said, I'll take care of the family, and supported the family from then on. So Divine Mother always answers our questions, but rarely in the way that we ask them. And so Swamiji answered people's questions, but rarely answering them from the list where they read them out. And so being with him was a wonderful experience, because it was an experience not so much of content, even though his content was brilliant and wonderful. It was an experience of love, of divine friendship, of uplifted consciousness. And not only did he have that himself, but because he related to each of us in that same way, we tended to rise up in his presence, to begin to express that higher consciousness and live in it. One time we were on a trip with him. He was doing some lectures, and a group of us were traveling, and we were staying in someone's apartment, so we all had sleeping bags, and we were just sleeping on the floor. And he came in the morning, and he said, "Good morning, all you great souls." And we kind of looked around, wondering who he was talking about. But he related to us as great souls. And because he related to us in that way, it raised our level of consciousness. It raised our desire to become great souls. And it filled us with a sense that the divine life was a very real and tangible possibility to be fulfilled. And so, as I say, being here with the same format, the same kind of room, different colored skin perhaps, different 40 years later than 45 years later than when I was with him then. But it's as if there is an eternal cycle, like the cycle of the seasons that happen every year. And so there's an eternal cycle, eternal relationship of devotees gathering together. And as Jesus says in the Christian Bible, where two or more are gathered together, there am I in the midst of them. And so we're far exceeding two or more gathered together. So God is with us.
I'll also share a few thoughts. If I'm not speaking loud enough, let me know. Sometimes people, we were speaking of this earlier with some of our teachers, they say, our new students say, how is meditation practical in my life? How can it help me in my daily life? And of course, this is a valid question, but I think for me, looking at the life of Swami Kriyananda, he so captured that. You know, the name that he chose for himself, the monastic name, Ananda. Kriya means both the technique, the pranayama technique, but it also means action. So joy through meditation and joy through action. And what he did in his life, I came to Ananda and became a student and a daughter of Swami when I was 22. That was many years ago. And I learned everything from him. Really, there's nothing that I know of value that I didn't learn from him. But he shared with us how to put God into action, how to take the inspiration and the power that you feel in meditation, and then how to use that when you go into your daily life, how to use it when you're cooking for your family. I remember the first time we invited Swamiji over for dinner. It was shortly after we were married, and I didn't know too much about cooking then, but and I was quite nervous. And in America, we don't have servants so much. We do the work ourselves. So Swami came into our home and Jyotish greeted him, but I was in the kitchen and I was in the oven and not paying attention. And Swami came up to me rather strongly, turned me around, and he said, "Hello, it's so nice to see you." And he was trying to tell me, when your guests come, you greet your guests. Don't worry about what's in the oven. And he just, so many, many ways that way, but not in a critical way, not to say you're a foolish young woman, but just to say this is the way to do it properly. And so many things, the whole process of starting communities, you know, people, once a saint from India, another man came and looked around and at Ananda village, and I hope someday many of you can come. I know many of you have seen the movie Finding Happiness, and that gave you a little taste. But this man, it was Sant Keshavadas was his name, and he looked around and he said, what a lot of tapasya Swami Kriyananda has had to create this work. And it's true. It was tremendous, constant decades of offering every ounce of his strength and his energy, but at the same time there was a joy. I remember the very first day I set foot on the Ananda, I came to the Ananda community, there was almost nothing there, almost bare ground. There was a few old apple trees, an old orchard, an old barn. It had been a farm. In fact, it had been a pig farm before we bought it. So the vibrations were not necessarily very high. But I remember I was reading autobiography of a yogi. Someone gave me a little brochure about Ananda meditation retreat. And, you know, we're going to be giving a talk on Sunday night on karma, destiny, and free will. Talk about karma and destiny. There, I was living 2,000 miles away, and I saw this little brochure, little 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, folded in half, black and white mimeographed, and I looked at it and I said, I'm going to go there. People said, why? I can't tell you why. There was karma and destiny, but I arrived there, took a bus, Greyhound bus, and I set foot on that property, and I just felt literally this wind kind of blowing around me and really to say through me. And I knew it was the wind of destiny. I knew something great was starting here, some great work that would have a tremendous impact on others in a helpful way. And then I met Swamiji, and little by little he began training us in how to meditate. As Jyotish said, we didn't know anything. We probably were yogis in past lives, but up till this point, and when we met him, we really knew nothing. We were just American college students by and large. But God brought us all together, and Swami looked at what he had. Maybe he wished he could have had a better batch, but this is what God gave him. And he taught us how to meditate, how to chant, how to do yoga postures, and how to live our lives with clarity, with dharma, with integrity, and he never wavered from that. And he showed us how not to compromise in the world. You know, some of you know the story. In 1976, the community was hit by a forest fire and was burnt to the ground. We lost everything that we had. And the cause of the fire was found to be a piece of equipment, a big road equipment that belonged to the local county government. And all of our neighbors who owned property in that area, who sustained a loss in the fire, they all sued the county and settled out of court for literally millions of dollars. We had no insurance. We had no way to rebuild. But Swami took a very firm stand. He said, we did not come here to take from others. We came here to give, and we will not sue, even though we sustained by far the greatest loss. And I was so proud to be a part of a group that could say, here we are in a time of dire need, and we know that money was there. All we had to do was take legal action. We would have gotten it. But he said, no, that's not dharmic. It's not really their fault that the piece of equipment malfunctioned and set out a spark. Why should we take that out on them and out on the local taxpayers? So we wrote a letter and we said, we know you're expecting us to take legal action. Please know we are not going to do that. And so he showed us how to put God in action in our daily life and to accomplish things. You know, so much can be accomplished when you take the focus of meditation and then you bring it into your daily life. Once again, I had just been Ananda for a few years, and Swami, they had built him a new geodesic dome. He'd been living in a smaller one, but this was on a different piece of property. And so he was going to be moving in a few days. And at Ananda Ashram, we do all the work. I mean, we don't hire people to build the houses or paint the rooms, do the gardens. We do it all. And so Swami, he was standing, we just happened to be there, and he said, I'm going to be moving into my house in a few days. The group of people that were there, will you come and help me paint the inside? And we were always happy to be around him. So we said, of course, Swamiji. And so it was a geodesic dome, which is made out of hexagons and pentagons. And so it had a big window, big picture window looking out of course, this beautiful river valley. And it had a lot of wooden beams going down all the angles around in the middle. And for some reason he said, Devi, can you stain those beams with dark colored paint? So I said, fine, Swamiji. And so we began in the morning after breakfast, and we painted, and others were painting different parts of the house. And then at a certain point, he said, oh, it's time to break for lunch. And so we took lunch, and he said, come back in the afternoon. So we came back, and he was painting with us. It wasn't like he was off doing something else. So we were all painting and painting and painting. And then finally, we didn't notice the time. We just were trying to finish the job. And then he kind of stopped, and he said, I think we've done enough work today. Let's all go home and go to sleep. And so we stopped, and we looked at our watch, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning. We had painted all afternoon, all evening, didn't stop for dinner till 3 a.m. But he had so much concentration that it was like it drew us into that. And we were told, and I know he was teaching us, you see, when your mind is focused and concentrated, how much you can get done and you're not even aware of it. And so he trained us in those ways too, how to use the concentration in meditation to accomplish things. Also, Ananda had many critics and people that whenever you try to do a good thing, you always get opposition. There's a rather cynical statement that says, no good deed goes unpunished. And Swami said, no, that's cynical. We should change that. No good deed goes unnoticed by God. Even if no one sees it, God sees it. So even when people would be criticizing us and trying to cause us problems, because of the love and the centeredness in God that Swamiji had, he always showed us how to say, no one is our enemy. Even if they do us harm, we only return kindness to them. And that kind of consciousness is again born of meditation. It's the fruit of meditation. And maybe people think, well, what's the good of that? The more people harm you, the more you kind of accept it. No, it isn't a matter of that. It's a matter of not having animosity in your heart towards anyone. It's not if someone's stealing from you, you say, oh, how nice. Here, let me open my other pocket. Not like that. But if someone does something in your heart, you don't have to bear them ill will. You don't be foolish about it. You protect your interests, but we don't have to react in any negative way. And so in so many ways, he showed us how to take the consciousness of meditation and how it's the most practical thing in the world. And I look at, when I first came to Ananda, I came from a middle-class family, rather traditional, and had finished my college education. And my parents were not altogether pleased that I had made that choice. But the years went by. I came from a large, extended family, one brother, but many cousins, and they all kind of did more predictable things. And at first my mother I think she had regret in her heart that she couldn't understand why did you choose this? And it was hard for me to explain to her. I just said, and she was a wonderful soul. I was very close with her. I tried. I said, Mother, it's just what I know I need to do with my life. And over time, she watched me. She watched my life unfold. She came and met Swamiji. And at a certain point, she said to me, and it was not too many years before she died, and I was so grateful we had this understanding at the end. She said, you're the only one of all of your generation in our family that did something out of the ordinary, that didn't do just what was expected of you. But then she added, but you're the only one that's happy. Everyone else has been disappointed by all the things they thought would bring them happiness. And so this life in God, this life of meditation, it is so rewarding on so many levels and so practical and so applicable in every difficulty. You can find an answer from these teachings and from the inner experience of meditation. But Swamiji showed us all of these things. And that, as Jyotish was saying, he concluded his talk with this beautiful cycle of God sharing with God and the eternal cycle of the guru-disciple relationship, where the soul, the truth seeker, after stumbling in the dark for many incarnations, finally says, Lord, show me the way out. I know there's nothing in this world that will really bring me the happiness I'm seeking. And God brings us great ones like Yogananda Ji, like Kriyananda Ji, and they say, come, I will show you. I will show you how to live your life in God. I will show you, more importantly, how to become one with God. And so there's no way we can ever repay what the Guru has given us except to try to share his love with everyone.
So we want to give a little opportunity if someone has a question. If you have a list of 12, then no, we won't get to all of those. But if anyone has a question.
If you have a list of 12, then we have not raised your consciousness very much.
Last one question. You have been now, around the world. You are seeing, you were with Swamiji for many years. So in a way, you have seen the human nature in terms of the evolution happening, how we progress. So in your observation, if you have to advise us, what are the few things that we should really hold on to, irrespective of what is happening, in terms of what is in terms of faith and.
Beautiful question.
Yeah.
Why don't you repeat it?
I'll
because
repeat
maybe
it.
people
He's
don't
saying that we've been around the world and seen many, many groups, many cultures for a long time. And what are the few things that we should hold on to that are really important out of that? Well, I'll say a few, and I'm sure Daviji will have some also. I would say perhaps the most important in my mind is to keep somehow your heart and your mind turning toward God. That different cultures have different difficulties that they go through. They have different vibrations. There's always going to be a culture around you that is trying to pull your mind and your heart away from God. And that will be very important to you, but it'll be different in each country. In some countries in America where there's much more wealth, there's a kind of a constant sense that why should you turn toward anything spiritual? And there are many seekers, but I won't go through each culture. But I would say for India, one of the challenges that you have at this point is that you have two almost conflicting currents. One is that religion or spirituality has been here for thousands of years, and that spirituality has to some extent become encrusted in forms that for many people don't seem terribly pertinent in today's modern world. And so there's a tendency to want to say, well, maybe religion itself is not that important. I have so much to do to get ahead in life. And so don't be drawn in. The particular challenge in India that I see as an outsider is the tendency to get drawn into the thought that spirituality is not important, whereas getting ahead is important, and getting more secure, more higher position, and so on. That's where the real energy ought to go. But that dividing line between spirituality and getting ahead needs to disappear. What we need to find is a way that our spirituality, one, brings us inner happiness. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to get ahead, but one brings us inner happiness so that we aren't driven by a sense of hunger, but rather by a sense of righteousness in that which we're trying to do to get ahead, and we're more open to share, more open to include others. But one of the things that Master brought in this age is the understanding that our spirituality does not have to be divorced from our practical affairs. But you can't get so caught up in the practical affairs that you forget that spirituality is where your true fulfillment. So one of the challenges and one of the things we all have to work on together is how to blend those two together so that you neither lose success on one hand nor spirituality on the other hand. Maybe you have some thoughts of his question.
Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe you'd like to say something. Maybe.
Well, I'll answer more kind of on a personal level. I think you don't have to live very long to observe that life is one challenge after another, whether it's health or family or finances or whatever it might be. Sometimes worse, sometimes better. But I think to not live in fear. Whatever God gives, see everything that comes, even the worst of things, see it as coming from God. Just say, God, this, why, you're giving us this. We had a very, very dear friend who was diagnosed with cancer. And when he first was given the diagnosis, he was a longtime devotee. He said for a few seconds, his mind reacted in fear. And then immediately he straightened it and he said, Master, this is from you. And I know will have blessings from you. And everything went through so perfectly because of that. So whatever happens difficult in life, immediately, don't let the fear or the anxiety grip you, but just say, God, everything is from you. Everything. And then beyond that, to have gratitude, to say, this is just what I needed. And I've seen this so often in people, dear friends and Guru Bhais who have gone through deep tests. They said, I gained more spiritually from this than I could have from anything else. So we were talking recently, actually it was with this man, Indu Ban, who is an old friend of Swamiji's, and from 1958. It's a long story, I won't go into it. But he told us that just shortly after the partition of Pakistan and India, a woman came they knew that Rani, his mother and Indu, often went to see Anandamoy Ma, the great woman saint. And they said, can you please go to Ma and ask her if she will pray that the president of Pakistan will cooperate with the president of India. And so they went and they asked Ma this, and she was really a great saint. And she sat immobile for many hours, just kind of looking off into space. And then after some time, she came down to ordinary consciousness, and she said, don't you think he who created this world knows how to rule it? And that's all she said. And so it's such a wonderful kind of basis that whatever happens, God knows how to, just what we need in our lives. So for me, that's been such an important thing, not to react no matter what happens with fear or anxiety, but with faith in God, with gratitude even. And then little by little, you start figuring the game out. And then you realize, God, there's nothing that you can put on my plate that I won't feel your love from. And when that happens, life is really a joy.